you, we are now into day 3 of our big read from Solving the Race Issue in America. And, day 3 has been a really, really great experience because over the last 2 days, we have learned a lot. Dr. Rogers and I are from that tween generation. And he said, what's the tween generation? That's the generation between nothing and something. Okay. In other words, so much of the technical stuff, we're both kind of accustomed to lecturing in college campuses and, having the students diligently take notes. And now it's a new day here. And we are coming from a whole nother perspective, but guess what? That works too. So our technical stuff is together. We've learned how to do what must be done on this Zoom format. And we are now ready to really, really proceed. Just a couple of overview and review points. We started on Monday, our first day. We gave a quick overview of the 20 days, and we're going to be reading for a total of 20 days. This is the third day, Monday through Friday at 1 p.m., 1 to 2 p.m. And we'll have readers, college students, community people, but folks who really care about what's happening in our country and care about making a new day and a new way in dealing with this tremendous, I'll call it this cancer of racism on our country. The first day we did our prologue where we gave a reason for writing the book, the fact that the political events of the pre and post Obama era really transformed us all and was a big wake-up call that things that we thought had been settled, racial issues that we thought had been resolved, were not resolved and were there seething below the surface, and they really needed to be addressed. And we also learned that our young people, and Ariel and many young people now, are really carrying the ball. I was alive during the civil rights era of the 50s and the 60s, and it was a profound experience. But it was the one thing we learned then was that the people who were carrying the ball were the young people. The Greensboro Four, Joe McNeil and the other 3 young men from Greensboro, they were freshmen and sophomores in college. Joe was only 18 years old. And so this entire civil rights struggle has really been maintained by the young people. So one of the reasons that we really set out to do our reading from our book, the Solving the Race Issue in America, was to get young people involved. And the reason we really did it during Black History Month is that there's a profound connection between the history and the reality. I think Malcolm X said that if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And so one of the goals that we wanted to do in the book was to help people understand the history, not in the context of guilt or you shouldn't have done it, you should have done it, but in the context of knowledge, to know what has transpired so that we can then go forth. Once we acknowledge our situation, our reality, we can go forth. And so today this is day 3 of that journey. And we have some powerful young people who are sharing. So let me give it back to Dr. Rogers. Turn your mic on, Doc, so that you can introduce our speaker today, our first speaker today.
Absolutely. And Dr. Harris, just technical, we're having Tyler Perry is seeking to get on as a panelist. I forwarded to him my access. And again, he was able to get on as an observer, but not a panelist. So I'm not sure if we're able to send it again from the mothership from your computer, but that will be helpful.
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
Excellent. Thank you for the welcome. Welcome, everyone. And we have with us Ariel Payne. We see her still picture there, and it's her in a wonderful red attire. Ariel is a junior political science major at the Florida A&M State University in Tallahassee, Florida. And so Ariel will be joining us for the big read as a reader. Ariel, which city are you from? And it's so good to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Greetings, everyone. My name is Ariel Payne. I am a second-year political science student at FAMU. I am from Tallahassee, so I do attend, the university in my hometown, and it is a pleasure.
Excellent, excellent. We're also being joined by Mr. Tyler Ford, who is a Shaw University alum, and he is in the world of lobbying. He's a political science graduate. He's in the world of lobbying, and he now works for the Vogel Group. Is that in Washington, D.C., Mr. Ford?
Yeah, the Vogel Group's in Washington, D.C.
Yes, yes. Welcome. We're so pleased to have you, and tell us a little bit about you before Ariel begins to read. Where's your hometown? Where are you from?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, about 30 minutes outside of Atlanta. I came up to Raleigh to go to school. So I went to Shaw University, where I was a political science major, and Dr. Rogers was one of my professors. And I started working. I worked for a few politicians in DC and in North Carolina. Upon graduation, I joined McGuire Woods, which was is a international law and lobbying firm, and I stayed there for about a year and a half before joining the Vogel Group, which is a boutique lobbying firm based out of DC. So excited to join the call today.
Excellent. So good to see you. We're listening forward to your reading voice as well. So Miss Ariel, will you begin with chapter 1, the book overview, with your reading, please?
Yes, of course. How's my audio?
Your audio is fine, Ariel. Maybe you can angle your camera down a little bit.
What about now?
There, perfect.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Chapter 1, book overview. In this book, Solving the Race Issue in America, we will present a factually based analysis of the motives, attitudes, and treatment of Black Americans by white Americans in power. This book is a personal commentary on the social, political, and economic condition and experience of Black Americans, African Americans in America. It focuses on the root causes of these conditions, their present impact, and the future possibilities. We will observe that the segregation and separation of Black and white Christians in the practice of their religion undermines the one nation under God concept and fertilizes, nourishes, and perpetuates the seeds of division in America. These seeds of division grow into weeds of racism that undermine and devour the American dream. From before the birth of this nation in 1776, the powers that be in America have enslaved, abused, taken advantage of, and otherwise marginalized Black Americans. In spite of the fact that Black men like Crispus Attucks died in the revolt and war against England, Black Americans, free and slave, were totally marginalized by the white Christians who signed the Declaration of Independence, created the U.S. Constitution, and otherwise founded this country. We will show that the issue of slavery was an integral part of the evolution of this country, from its impact on the framing and adopting of the U.S. Constitution through the series of laws and court decisions that permitted, encouraged, and perpetuated the institution of slavery. The making of a slave, as laid out in grim detail by Willie Lynch, an 18th century authority on slaveology, was the process by which proud, productive, kidnapped Africans were transformed into American slaves. The 100-monkey phenomenon, a non-racial behavior modification process, provides when a finite number of a particular species have a certain thought or demonstrate a particular behavior, then all members of that species will become aware of that thought or will demonstrate that behavior. The slave-making process in the 100th monkey phenomenon, interpreting the slave-making process in terms of the 100th monkey phenomenon, we will see a scientific explanation for the plight of Black Americans in the United States. Through the vicious, horrendous slave-making process, we will see that white Christian Americans created a slave consciousness or mentality and a slave master consciousness or mentality that has impacted the thinking and behavior to this very day of both Black and white Americans. It is a fundamental principle of psychology that once a behavior is created, it will continue essentially unchanged until a new or different behavior is introduced or adopted. We will also find that there have been no serious or sustained changes to the slave consciousness and slave behaviors so created by white Christian Americans using chains, whips, violence, death, and threats of death on Black Christian Americans. In fact, we will see that every significant attempt by Black Americans to change their condition for the better has been met with subtle, overt, and blatant opposition by the white Americans in power. This opposition was crystallized by the Emancipation Proclamation, energized through United States Supreme Court decisions, implemented through laws passed in state and local governments, often justified with claims of states' rights. It is perpetuated to this very day in the hearts, minds, and sights of Black and white Christian Americans. As we look at America's track record in dealing with Black Americans, we see new versions of the same slave-making lessons described by Willie Lynch and used with brutal effectiveness by white American slave masters throughout the United States. White Americans have committed brutalities and atrocities against Black Americans from the Reconstruction through the Black Codes, the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana, the Supreme Court ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson, the coup of 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, Jim Crow laws, the Atlanta riots, the Tulsa, Oklahoma destruction of Black Wall Street, the Rosewood Massacre, the New York City riots, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, the Birmingham bombing of the 1960s, and the present day systematic destruction and miseducation of Black American children, to name a few. The purpose of these brutalities and atrocities, behavior modifications, and behavior implantations was and still is to teach and reteach Black Americans their proper place in a white man's country, the so-called land of the free and home of the brave.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. You know, excuse me, Ariel, as you were reading, you know, as a writer, you write it, but when you hear it read back again, it can have a totally different and more profound impact. And as you were reading it, especially that last portion, when we were just going through a few of the many things done, you know, by white Americans to Black Americans, it strikes something in your heart. And so it really just reminds us that these things have taken place, that they are facts, they are realities, and until we face them, you know, there's that sense so often when we wrote this book, there was a lot of resistance because some people who read it said, I didn't have a part in that. I wasn't there. I didn't participate in it. And that you're just stirring up stuff. But, you know, racism is a lot like cancer. It may even go away for a while. But unless you really deal with it, it will come back and bite you and really create some very negative results and experiences. And so as you were reading, it just brought back so many memories. And to those who are watching, white and Black, it's important that we recognize this. Don't sweep it under the rug. These things happened, but these form a foundation from which we must grow and become who we are destined to be, who we we say we want to be as Americans, where we are truly one nation under God.
And another interesting point, Dr. Harris, is this idea of excavating the past to truly understand it so we can move forward. Because we know, for example, recently with the voting rights suppression and what transpired in Atlanta, Georgia, was in fact fueled by voter suppression in the state of Georgia earlier when Stacey Abrams, for example, ran for governor. And when I see you listed down here quite a few things, the Black codes, it makes me think of the Black tax. The Colfax massacre in Louisiana, now that's one I'm not familiar with, as I am the Supreme Court ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson and the coup of 1898, which you go into detail in the text. The Atlanta riots, the Tulsa, Oklahoma destruction of Black Wall Street. And I guess if we just keep listing, we could go to Hurricane Katrina, George Floyd, the young lady who is in the media now because she's 9 years old and they handcuffed her and they pepper sprayed her. And all these things, they really do hurt your heart, but it just shows how, even though this is historical, it's contemporary as well.
Wow, yeah. Sometimes you think maybe it will never end until we confront it.
Right.
So many times, in politics, when we worked there were so many situations where people said, well, that was the past, that was over. And when we understand that past, we were reading, I think yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that there was a period for about nearly 100 years where just documented cases of hangings right up to the 60s, not right up to times when we were alive, were taking place. And yet the United States Senate, it took until I think 2006 or 2010 to at least come up with a resolution against lynching. And so you say, well, how could that be? Why was that? And that really, in 2005, Senator Mary Landrieu sponsored we call it a weak, watered down resolution just to apologize for lynching. And still there was a reluctance. The senators did not want to take a roll call vote. They wanted to take a voice vote because they didn't want their name put down to be against lynchings. And so it just says that until we can confront this thing and deal with it, it's going to really plague our country. And we see how it keeps coming back worse and worse and worse. It's so much like cancer.
Right.
Doc, maybe, are there any questions from our panelists based on what Ariel has read so far?
Let's see. I'm trying to join you on Instagram Live. So that was me that called you, Dr. Harris, seeking to do so. Just basically people logging in, read, and then we can go back and address questions and concepts then.
Okay, very good. Thank
Mr.
you, Ariel. Thank you.
I said Tyler Perry. Excellent reading, Miss Ariel. I said Tyler Perry, but of course I meant Mr. Tyler Ford. Could you unmute yourself and join us?
Yep, I'm here.
Wonderful. If you would begin your read on the paradigm of slavery, please, page 20.
White America over the last 400 years has designed, created, and perpetuated the slave mentality and slave behavior that affects Black Americans, and the slave master mentality and slave master behavior that afflicts white Americans. Together, these two mentalities and behaviors constitute the paradigm of slavery. In spite of brief moments of hope that America will live up to the lofty promises of its Constitution, such as the Civil Rights Movement and legislations of the 1950s, 60s, and the 1970s, the paradigm of slavery is so deeply entrenched in the psyche of America that most attempts at substantial change are eventually undermined and neutralized. On the surface, things may look better. You will see Black and white Americans sitting together in public restaurants or riding together on public transportation. You see more and more interracial couples on television and in the community, even in cities where a Black man would have been lynched 40 or 50 years ago for even speaking a certain way to a white woman. But underneath the surface, on the underbelly of reality where the ugly, unpleasant truth resides, virtually nothing has been done to change the paradigm of slavery. Black Americans are still second-class citizens. Historic Black American colleges are still underfunded. The unemployment rate for young Black Americans is much higher than their white counterparts. In the 25 through 29 age group, an estimated 11.9% of Black men were in prison or jails, compared with 3.9% of Hispanic males and 1.7% of white males. According to a recent study from the Justice Policy Institute, after 20 years of harsh criminal justice policies, there are more Black American men in prison or jail than in college. By the year 2000, there were 600,000 Black men in jail or in prison, as compared to 603,032 enrolled in colleges or universities. In 1980, before the prison boom, Black men in college outnumbered Black men in prison by a margin of more than 3-1. Yet, rather the change of the paradigm of slavery and final cleanse of America of its sins and historical crimes against humanity, the creation and sorry, can't say it right now. Of slavery of Black Americans, white America wants to blame Black Americans for their condition. This blame the victim consciousness grows stronger each day in America as social, economic, and educational programs supported by well-intentioned white and Black Christian Americans are reduced, undermined, and essentially eliminated. The paradigm of slavery was and still is the creation of white Christian Americans. It has consumed the United States of America from its creation in 1776 to the present. This destructive paradigm of slavery can only be changed by the white Christian Americans who maintain it, or are the beneficiaries of it, working together with the Black Americans who continue to suffer under it.
Wow. Thanks so much. Thank you so much. I tell you, Tyler, you know, we often say liars may figure, but figures don't lie. We thank you so much. And when we see the figures and we begin to realize that we have more Black men now in college, in prison, than we do in college. That's a scary thought. And it almost says that we've been going backwards for the last 25, 30 years. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Rogers, as an educator?
I'm thinking about the executive order that the recent president, Joe Biden, put into place where he's seeking to get rid of private prisons. And we've heard dialogue about, I think it's CCCP, Corrections Corporation, something of America, or CCCA, and how in fact in the 90s, it's starting to come out that record executives colluded to make sure that the artists use certain language, told certain stories, used certain tropes in the music of murder and mayhem and craziness, because they were preparing a generation of young people to actually go into the prisons. And Jawanz Kunjufu, who wrote the book, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, he talks about the fourth grade failure syndrome and how before fourth grade, our young men are excelling, they're doing extremely well, and something happens in the fourth grade. And it's at that point that they can note out if they fail the fourth grade, it'll be this many years before we get them in the prison industrial complex. So this is it's a systematic, well-worked way that interlocks. It isn't just a one theme situation that places our young men in prisons over giving them higher education opportunities beyond the 12th grade. And that's how I see it as an educator. And like Tyler Ford, brilliant, you know, him and his colleagues able to juggle working, going to school, being in student government, being an entrepreneur. And I've seen these young, sharp men that were able to kind of, you know, navigate that terrain. And I'd like to know what his thoughts are, particularly as a young man of color who was able to, you know, avoid going into incarceration and being successful in his early start of his career. What are your thoughts on the matter, Tyler?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I find it very interesting as I was reading and kind of thinking at the same time about the words that I was reading, and how deep they were. And I couldn't help but think about my present circumstances and I guess, and in the sense, my past circumstances, you know, growing up in the South. I grew up in Georgia and have family in Tennessee and came up to North Carolina for school. Um, I more or less lived in what felt like sometimes two different worlds. So, the South, it's like, you pass by each other, but then, you know, going to school or hanging out with certain people versus, my internships or now my job. So, after college, going to HBCU, but then joining the workforce and, Raleigh and in the capital city, I thought of, North Carolina, and North Carolina has the second most HBCUs in the United States. But, I was more or less the only young Black person in any corporate buildings. And I found that very interesting. Even joining a firm in DC, you kind of go through these corporate law firm and lobbying websites of who they hire. They typically don't hire Black men or young Black men. And it's just very interesting for me to see, as I am typically the only Black face in most of my meetings, or, and working in politics is a very real circumstance, because it's not only are you dealing with the workforce, but it's politics. People are very blunt about what's going on. People are very blunt about issues. And as a young Black man, it's very interesting to sit in rooms of non-Black people who are discussing policies that affect disproportionately Black people. So as I read through the book, Doctor, a little bit more, I think a lot of these issues are still very relevant, still, and very interesting, of what's going on in America.
Thank you for that. Dr. Harris?
Yes. Coming up now, I came up in the 60s, and I attended Columbia University. I guess I really date myself, but I entered Columbia University in 1960. And at that time, there were 5 Black students and 725 white students. And by the end of the first year, there were 2 Black students left in my class out of the 5 that had started. And so you had, during that period, I found that it was a transformational experience, because coming from the South, there was a mindset, for example, that the Black schools were inferior to the white schools. But coming from a Black school to an Ivy League college, I was proof positive that that was not true. But on the other hand, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. When my daughter went to Columbia 50 years later, she had an opportunity to come in early. I had actually skipped the 12th grade. And my experience at college was my whole college career was devoted to being an example, to not failing, to make everything wrong that people were thinking. And the reason for that, though, was that in our Black community at the time, we had such a value put on education. I mean, really and truly, everybody, they would want you to go to college, go to community, go to something and learn something. And there was a complete, the paradigm was that education was the way out. When Sandra was in the South, she would live in the farm, and she said she promised the good Lord and 3 responsible people she'd never crop tobacco again. And her way out was to go to A&T State University. And so that paradigm at the time was very profound. I mean, people wanted to go to school because so long we had been pushed aside in the overall education community, and the historically Black colleges were the only place we could come. And what it was showing was that they were turning out first-rate students.
Absolutely.
But today, very interesting, I don't know, there's so many other ways to get rich. You know, in other words, when I was a kid, education was the solution. Today, with our young people, education may not be the primary solution. As I watch a lot of the television, you know, like I want to become a rapper, I want to become a singer. When I was a young man, people wanted to aspire to sing and do things, but education was still the solution. It was the way out. I don't know today if that is the case is in the younger generation. Any thoughts on that?
Ariel, what are your thoughts on that, on what Dr. Harris just put forth? You're down there at FAMU, the home of Common, and what do they call your band? The best band in the world. What are your thoughts on how students are interpreting their opportunities through education as well as through other means? What do you see?
Well, I think it all goes back to what you were saying earlier, as far as the education system failing a lot of Black students, as far as not teaching us where we come from, not teaching us that we have created things or that we have created establishments. I mean, I would say the best term to summarize what is taking place would be psychological warfare. I think what we're experiencing today in America as African Americans is psychological warfare. From an early age, they, you know, I think they condition us to believe that we are inferior, starting with them, starting our history books with slavery, as if that is where African American history starts. I think that is a form of psychological warfare, and it all just contributes to, again, the psyche of many young African Americans who, because they haven't seen examples of white scientists, of white engineers, they don't know that, you know, we have a history of that. We were some of the first engineers of many things that we still use today. That many things, you know, many things that we use daily, we created. And I think because we aren't taught that in the American educational system, we don't know about it. And we also believe that we cannot achieve it. So I think the government now putting millions of dollars into the hip hop industry for them to promote sex, violence, and crime to our young children is what ultimately determines what they believe they can achieve when they get older. If they see people that look like them, you know, promoting violence, promoting hate against their very own women within their race, that's what they tend to mimic, because that is the paradigm, as per the term you used in your book. That is what they view as reality, as their reality. And I think what Tyler touched on briefly was that we live in 2 separate realities. A lot of white Americans are oblivious to the fact that they have white privilege because of past events. So we are definitely living in a time where it is important for our young African American men to see Black male leaders, so that they know that they can become Black engineers, Black authors. If the government only promotes Black men who are rappers, or only places a certain type of man on a pedestal, then it limits what we can do as a race.
Mm.
I would just leave it there.
No, this is great. I want to ask you another question, because some of us attended HBCU, some of us didn't, but we were active in the Black Student Union, fraternities and sororities. Give us a perspective on what life is like at Florida A&M University in modern times. Like the Black excellence, the brilliance that you're coming in contact with constantly.
Yes.
Paint a picture for us of what that's like.
Yes. So again, as I mentioned,
before you go, can I just interrupt you? Let me tell you something. You had chills going up and down my spine. As you were talking, I was just thinking that, like, so we hear so much negativity about our young people. And as you were talking, it was like, all of that is wrong. I was looking, Rhonda said, speak it, young leader.
And I also saw Dr. Eno in the comments. Hello, Dr. Eno.
Yes.
Dr. Eno is a professor in the social science department at FAMU, and I've been one of his students for about 2 consecutive years. As I stated, I am a second-year political science student, so attending FAMU has been great. As I previously stated, we are currently under psychological warfare right now. So the importance of showing Black men what they can be is at an all-time high right now. I just want to go ahead and say that any young African Americans who may still be in high school or middle school watching this, please attend a HBCU. I am not being biased. I am not just being a hotepper right now, but I am saying attend a HBCU so you can surround yourself with young, like-minded people who are accomplishing their goals. At FAMU, we have an amazing SGA. We have multiple organizations for you to get involved in. I am currently the program director of Big Sister Little Sisters mentoring program. We have multiple organizations similar to this where we can teach young African-American women how to grow, how to speak, how to prepare for job interviews, etc. You want to surround yourself with this type of environment where you're encouraged to go for anything. I mean, in the American educational system, being an African American, it can be hard. Okay, you can get discouraged when they start showing you the percentage of Black African Americans who drop out of college. It gets discouraging. Or just when you're reading all of the history and reading all of the accomplishments of white Americans, when you're reading all of that and consuming all of that, you start to get discouraged because you're thinking to yourself, where are the Black people who have done amazing things? It can really change the way you view yourself or view your race. Okay, we don't even want to talk about the self-hatred in our community right now, but it stems from the things that we've consumed over the years and the things that we've consumed in the education system. So attending a HBCU where now you're not only learning about white philosophers, but you're now learning about Black philosophers and Black people who contributed to politics and, the government. So that way you can condition yourself to believe that you can also achieve the same things and do it even better.
Wow.
Excellent. I mean, just, they hear the young people, Dr. Harris, I know we're dealing with our history, and it's almost like time traveling from all of the traps that were set. We have students like Ariel, professors like Dr. Victor Eno, who's a brilliant professor at FAMU, students like Tyler Ford, forgive me, Tyler. And I'm wondering just if you could, Tyler, speak momentarily about what it's like in DC with the Vice President Kamala Harris being a HBCU alum. You know, she graduated from alma mater, from Howard University. Is that percolating up? Are you hearing what is that translating into in the environments you find yourself as an HBCU alum?
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, so I worked for the Congressional Black Caucus for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas. And, you know, the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, has really pushed an emphasis on recruiting students from historic Black colleges and universities. And with the I guess, election of Vice President Harris, you know, there's been a renewed talk of what it means to go to HBCU and recruiting. So you see a lot of offices actively reaching out, or I think trying to build better relationships with HBCUs. Whereas before, you know, it was kind of like a on and off relationship. And I think it's really interesting more so in the corporate culture, with, you know, a lot of the events that have happened. You see a lot of corporate companies putting money into HBCUs. You see them, you know, whether it be Amit or maybe Mackenzie Bezos, former wife of Jeff Bezos, throwing multi-millions of dollars to HBCUs. Or you see a lot of corporate entities who historically have not even recruited at HBCUs, have not really thought outside of Morehouse or maybe Spelman Howard, really going, you know, into the Shaws, the FAMUs, the, you know, South Carolina states of the world and saying, hey, like, you know, we would like you to be part of our team, our culture. You know, and it's funny because I've done interviews with firms in DC and stuff like that. And now they're really saying, hey, you know, we have this diversity committee. We have all these things is like corporate, you know, corporate
support.
Realizing, yeah, like they're realizing, well, okay, we have a Black VP, and the Congressional Black Caucus is the largest caucus within the Democratic Party, and they're holding a lot of power.
Wow.
So now they're realizing, you know, and whether that you take that as a good thing or a bad thing, you know, that, you know, it takes certain types of power to achieve equality, but still there is a real understanding of, you know, the types of students that HBCUs produce. And I think that continued partnerships between both public and private sector and HBCUs would be very, very important.
Wow. Excellent. And I just wanted to throw one more thing out there, Dr. Harris, and turn it back over. And that is, you know, they're at FAMU. I think that's where psychologist Kobe Cambon, Dr. Kobe Cambon taught. Is that right, Ariel? And right across the street at Florida State University is where another psychologist, Dr. Naeem Akbar, taught for years and years. And both of these spoke to what it takes to navigate this terrain and to maintain one's psychological health, right? So you use the term, we're in the psychological warfare. There are scholars and authors that have written too, Amos Wilson being another, the types of skills and thoughts we need to do what you two are doing, navigating all of the trapdoors, et cetera, in order to continue to succeed in spite of this history. The history is not an impediment, but it's a testament to the strength that we have as a unit, that we're able to sit here on this Zoom during Black History Month and have this type of quality conversation, this intergenerational conversation. So I just like to speak to those two particular psychologists and to thank psychologists out there that are very interested in healing our collective trauma, our individual trauma, based on microaggressions and the many, you know, bouts with racism that we've seen in the corporate space, in the workplace, in the university environments, on television, in media, in music. In spite of all of that, we are still navigating this terrain and being successful in the process.
You know, Doc, we got a great comment from Ladarius, and he was talking about Dr. Francis Quest Welsing's book, The Color Confrontation Theory. And I think what he was saying at the end is that would you agree that knowing our history and culture would result in self and group respect in the Black community to achieve freedom? And I have to say, Ladarius, absolutely. You know, one of the, I had an opportunity a number of years ago to go to Egypt with Dr. Ben Yohanan. And if you're ever going to go to Egypt and study what
that's who you go with.
That's who to go with, okay? And we spent 3 weeks going through the pyramids, the Abu Simbel, and you know, the temples. Many of them are now underwater and you can't even visit them again. But one of the things that Dr. Ben really pointed out was that our history did not begin in slavery. Slavery was a bad experience and continues to be. But he was saying our history began 15,000 years ago in Egypt. That when you visit Egypt and you go through the pyramids and see the drawings on the wall, I think the thing that strikes you is that it's Black people. They're people of color. And I mean, after a while you begin, well, where is Egypt? Egypt is in Africa. Where does the Nile come from? It comes down from the heart of Africa. And so who would they be but Black people in Egypt? And so when we talk about the Egyptian culture, it's not necessarily the culture we see right now in the visual, but it's an African culture that existed. You think about this, King Tut ruled 1,300 years before the birth of Christ. So that would put us back about 1,400. No, that would put us back about 3,400 years ago. Or you go back and you look at the Step Pyramid, which was built 5,000 years before that. So you're looking at 10,000 years ago, Black people were in Africa, were in Egypt. And one of the things that fascinated me when I was in Cairo and I looked at I went inside King Tut's tomb, and it had a collection of the scepters of the people that Egypt ruled at that time. And one of the scepters there, as you looked at the likeness, you could see the Chinese person. You could see what looked like the Indian person. And so you say, well, you know what? At that time, Egypt was truly a world power. Okay. As a matter of fact, we talk so much about Greek culture, but the Greeks went to Egypt to learn. And so as Black people, one of the things as Ariel was talking about was that psychological warfare, that a part of the transformation that must take place is to change our thinking from the thinking that let's just say that the slave paradigm has created, that our beginnings were in the bottom of a slave ship coming over from a wild.
Hey, Doc, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear Tyler? Can you hear Ariel? Okay, it must just be me.
Okay.
Please continue, Doc.
All right. Our history was long before that, beginning on the slave ship. And if you notice, a part of the slave process, if you remember the Roots picture, the Roots series, and Kutu Kente, a part of that process was to cut you off from who you were, that you had no roots, that you were a tree with no roots, because when you have no roots, then you have no foundation. And therefore, whatever the slave paradigm, whatever thought, whatever mindset was given to you, that became your reality. And what we're seeing today with these young people, and Tyler and Ariel, I'm telling you, y'all are going to make me run around and jump up and down, okay? Because what we're seeing is how the young people, in spite of all that, we had that piece we wrote called The Kidnapped African Would Not Die. In spite of all the things that we talked about, as Tyler was reading, in spite of the lynchings, in spite of the burnings, in spite of the Colfax and all the different massacres, Wall Street, 1898, in spite of all that, still we rise. And that just says, man, you know what? Can you imagine what the world would be like if instead of being enslaved and put down, if we were embraced? We would probably have been flying jet planes 100 years ago.
And you know what, Dr. Harris, that speaks to Melody Hobson, who's married to George Lucas, the gentleman that came up with the Star Wars. She's also the CEO of Ariel Investments. And she talks about a study that came out that speaks to the trillions of dollars lost because the race issue in America has not been solved, right? So the lack of productivity, and when we spoke to the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce about over the next years, 2050, if we end racism, how much more economically productive the nation would be.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the fact that, you know, a Black man invented potato chips, Black folks invented the vehicle to transport ice, everything from the stoplight, Granville T. Woods to, you know, GPS was invented by a Black woman. So there's so many things that we've already created with oppression that imagine if we got rid of oppression, how much more productive our nation could be.
And you know, Doc, that's a great point. And I think corporate America now is beginning to see that. You know, slavery was an economic concept. It was not so much that, you know, white people hated Black people. That was just an emotional response. But in fact, slavery was an economic endeavor.
Yes.
It was a way to get free level to fuel an economic system. And so I think corporate America now is recognizing that system has had its course, but now in order for us to fly higher, we have to embrace diversity. That we have had this jewel, this diamond among our midst for the last 400 years, and we've been really beating that diamond up just to treat it like a piece of coal instead of polishing it and enhancing it and letting it be a diamond. Because, you know, as they say, the rising tide rises all ships. And if one person, when we look at the paradigm of slavery and the paradigm of racism, if our country is a great ocean liner on the sea of abundance and the sea of possibilities, then racism is like an anchor holding that ship in place so that it continues to go around and round in circles. It can never go anywhere. It can never travel to the point of its destiny. And so as I listen to these young people today, I say, you know, there's hope, there's possibility that in spite of all of that, we can still rise and become all that America is supposed to be. Did we have any questions from our panelists, Doc?
Gene Pizzo raised the point that, you know, he questions the persistence of African Americans being underpaid for doing the same jobs that our counterparts are doing. We know that women in America, for example, earn 66 cents on a dollar to their male counterparts. So I think the question out of Gene Pizzo's, you know, thought process is, how do we reverse that, change that around, shift the paradigm toward a paradigm, if you will, in your text, of freedom? And we have a couple more minutes before our time concludes, Dr. Harris. If you'd like to wrap that up, and then, you know, have Ariel and Tyler to say anything in closing before we conclude, I'll leave that in your hands.
Yes.
Hey, Doc, hey, don't mean to interrupt. I have to jump off right now for a client call. So I really appreciate you all having me, and let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Much success, continued success to you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Well, Doc, just as a wrap-up matter, the thought, that's why we, you know, the basic premises of solving the race issue in America is that this is a spiritual issue, and that laws and politics and whatnot will not change it. In the book, we talk about the fact that in North Carolina, and I'm sure that states throughout the South, Black teachers were paid 40% of what white teachers were paid. And nobody had a problem with that. And even when it was realized, even during the civil rights experience of the 60s, when that was brought out, and the system, the government responded to it, they still say, well, let's take 5 years to bring them back up to parity. And so, Gene, to really address that issue, we're going to have to really look at this spiritual solution to solving the race issue, that we have to acknowledge all those things, and not only acknowledge the existence of them, but to acknowledge that many of them were wrong and it did not demonstrate the golden rule. If we all claim to be God-fearing people, then the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto us. Until we can get that spiritual consciousness, then there will always be that unjustness, that inequality of things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for wrapping us up. Ariel Payne, are you still with us? We know you have a class coming.
Yes, sir. I am still here.
You have any last words?
Give us a closing sentiment from your perspective, and for everyone listening, we'll be back tomorrow from 1 to 2 with 2 additional readers to pick up from where we left off. Ariel, will you close us out, please?
Oh, yes. I would like to say thank you guys for having me. I definitely enjoyed reading today. This will not be my last time reading. I will return. I think it is important that we come together as a community and discuss these issues publicly. And like you said, we have African Americans here from multiple generations. So I think it's important that, you guys educate us on the importance of taking a stand for, our basic human rights.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're going to leave it there. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Have a blessed day.
Thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, share this. It will be on Facebook, on our Facebook page, which is Solving the Race Issue in America, facebook.com/Solving the Race Issue in America. You can also go to our website, www.solvingtheraceissue.com, where we'll be posting these videos as we complete editing them. But whatever you do, join us again tomorrow and bring somebody with you, because truly, truly, the best is yet to come. Thank you and good day.